Warning, this is not a podcast for those who have got it together. We are men seeking answers to the questions that have plagued our mind. Can we be undefeated?
All right. Thank you guys for listening to my podcast. I'm here with Gene. Hi, Gene.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come visit me. I recently, in the last, several months, and I've been pretty vocal about it. I really struggled with drinking. I went through a time period where I was practically trying to drink myself to death. And, part of that, me trying to recover from that, also seeking out help, trying to find answers. I met you through that journey. And in the short amount of time, I feel like you've been very instrumental to helping me kind of understand, what alcoholism is, to help me understand more about myself, and also understanding that there is an answer, I guess, to that. And I really appreciate that. And today, really, I wanted to have you on the program because I know some of your story, and to me, it's pretty inspirational. It's something that's really helped me. And I'm hoping that maybe that same story can help other people. And as I told you earlier, I feel like that people are, especially guys, I think more in the guys, I know women struggle with it too, but for me, I think there's a lot of guys out there struggling and not really knowing what to do or how to get help or which direction to go. And I think I was one of them. I think I went for a long time, knowing I had a problem with drinking but also I think my rub was I knew I had a problem, but I knew it wasn't the only problem. In other words, I almost felt like it was a result of other stuff going on. I felt like that the answer wasn't necessarily just quit drinking. I felt that there was more to that. And really through this, this road that I've been on, I've started to discover that there is more to it than that, but that is a big part of it. And so, if you don't mind, just start kind of telling your story. Why did you quit drinking? What made you, what's going on in your life?
All right. When I quit drinking, it was January of 2018. I had recently lost my job. Imagine that. And I'd recently lost my job, and my wife had kicked me out of the house as a result of my drinking and losing my job. And what had happened, a little backstory on that is I was out drinking one night, and that was a normal night, typical night. I was out drinking, and me and a guy I was with got pretty wasted, and it was about 4:30 in the morning, which is getting pretty close to time for me to have to be at work at 5:30. Yeah. And somebody had some cocaine, and that seemed like a good idea. So we did some cocaine, and of course they came out and gave us a drug test, and I lost my job. Yeah. Now, that'd probably been needed to happen for quite some time. It had been necessary. I hadn't been doing a very good job at my job for quite some time due to my drinking. Yeah. But I couldn't see that. I thought I was doing great. I was on top of the world. But they finally come out and they run me off on this drug test, and I was about 8 hours from home, and I left, and I called my wife, and I told her what had happened, and I kind of vomited all over. I told her a lot of what happened that she hadn't known, because of course I wasn't going to tell my wife the level I had been drinking at, because she was going to scold me, you know. Right. So I was headed home, and on the drive I called and told her what was going on and kind of what had happened. And of course she was frustrated, but I wasn't done. I was resentful at that point. You guys can't fire me. Right. And kind of heartbroken, because I really, really held a lot of pride in my job. I thought my job kind of made me who I was. Yeah. And on my way home I called and told her, time I get to town, my first thought is go by the bank and get some money. I'm gonna ride this thing out. I'm fixing to have a good time. Right. Go by the bank. There's no money in the bank. I was like, well, shit. Excuse my language, but she had got there first, and luckily for our sake, had moved our money to another account that I didn't have access to. And so I went on to the house. I'm gonna talk to her about it. And when I get there, I realized that all the locks on the house had been changed. I couldn't get in. Yeah. And she was not a happy camper, obviously. And but luckily, my mother-in-law's camper was parked at our house at the time, and she was kind enough to let me stay there while I went through whatever I was going through, and I didn't immediately get sober. She did leave me some money. I took that money and I went to Oklahoma City, where we go, and I found exactly what I was looking for in Oklahoma City. I was looking for more drugs, and I found it, and I ran around for about a week. And when I came back home, I was still in the camper, and luckily she was still willing enough to talk to me. Yeah. We kind of got together, and I was sitting in this camper trailer one night, and I had a bottle of vodka in each hand, and there were some drugs on the table, and I see now that God gave me a moment of clarity. Is this really what your life has become? I'm a 34-year-old man, no job, no home, no money, no nothing. I'm living in a camper behind my home that I had, that I do not have anymore. And the answer came right back. Yes, it is what my life has become, but I don't want it. Right. I don't want this life, And my wife sat down and talked with me, and we devised a plan. I started going to the intensive outpatient rehab program at Red Rock here in town, and I started going to AA. Now, I knew about AA because at 13 years old, I was an ornery kid, and I stole my mom's car, went over to see my girlfriend who lived in Sayre, and I was drinking with her older brothers, and on the way home, I got a DUI.
Oh, gosh.
And so at 13, yeah. So they took my driver's license till I was 18 and sentenced me to a 90-90 in AA and enrolled me in this juvenile drug court program is what it was called. And there was a lot of counseling. It was a 5-day-a-week thing after school. I go to this counseling deal, and a lady would do some counseling with us a little bit, and we had to go to AA. I tell you what, at 13, going to those meetings, we were not thinking about getting sober. Yeah, I didn't think I had a problem.
For sure.
Somebody apparently seen something before I did, but I didn't think I had a problem. And so I started going to AA at 13, and that's kind of how I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. I had an idea of it, but 22 years later, when I found myself back there, I came with a completely different attitude and a completely different mindset. There was no doubt that I had a problem, none whatsoever.
So when you were kind of at this real low point, I mean, how low was that point for you when you were sitting in that trailer? Like when I'm hearing it, it's like, I think in some ways it's easy to like, yeah, this is what happened, but it had to be in a pretty low point in your life, sitting in that trailer behind the house and not, everything you're talking about. Like, was there thoughts of suicide? Was there thoughts of, what was going through your head really that low point in your life?
That time was kind of fuzzy because I was under the influence of multiple things. Yeah. I'm sure there were, at some degree. What's the point of life, But I don't remember it right offhand. But I'm sure there was thoughts like that. How could there not be? I just lost everything in my life that meant anything to me. And it was bad. It was absolutely terrible.
Do you think, what I've noticed that after, stop drinking, the road after is, it's so much more than just quit drinking. Yes, not drinking is the big part, but then learning to live life sober, learning to deal with problems. Those problems don't go away. Those marriage problems that you were talking about, they didn't go away when you quit using drugs and drinking. They didn't stop. And then, but that road is so difficult. It's like a climb. It almost feels like everything is against you, especially in the early days of like recovery, that you can't seem to, you're having to deal with all these feelings that you didn't have to deal with before because you just masked it through whatever. And then you weren't working at that time too. So that had to be extra difficult.
Bro, you're 100% correct. That was, my first year in recovery was a little bit easier than the years that followed. I'm looking towards 5 years. If I make it to the 21st of this month, it'd be 5 years clean and sober for me. But that first year was kind of easy. It really was. I was neck deep in Alcoholics Anonymous program. I was going to service functions. Me and a sponsor of mine were traveling around all over the countryside to different meetings, and my wife gave me a lot of latitude in doing that. She do what you got to do, and I'm so grateful for her for giving me the time. She told me, because I was thinking about getting back to work. I felt less than a man by not working. I wasn't pulling my weight, and I always pulled my weight. My dad did the same, but it was difficult. It really was. But she gave me the time I needed to get myself together. Thank God, and to do what I needed to do to get to the point where I could function. And
what was your relationship with like God, like at that before all this? How would you describe that relationship?
My relationship with God before were prayers like foxhole. I always believed in something, I didn't know what it was, but I know when I was at low points in my life, I would turn to God and I would say those foxhole prayers. God, if you get me out of this one, buddy, I swear I will never do it again. You know, that age old thing. But lo and behold, he would pull my butt out of the fire. I didn't realize it then, but he pulled my butt out of the fire. And then all of a sudden it was luck or circumstance. Right. And today I don't believe in luck anymore. I really don't. I believe God works in my life on a day-to-day basis, and I can see it. I can absolutely see it. And, I thank AA for that, because I never had a personal relationship with God till I got here.
You know, a phrase that's come up a lot, it comes up whenever you listen to AA stuff, like the big book, and when you hear, like, you know, talks about it, but it's this idea of willpower. And it's funny, willpower is actually even a debatable subject with just Christianity. And part of it is, and there is people that maybe would listen to this and say, you know, what, come on, couldn't you stop drinking, or couldn't you just kind of moderate, or couldn't you, I mean, you know, they may look and think, you know, why can't you quit drinking? I think that people, whether you're talking about quitting smoking or quitting dipping or quitting whatever, that they think about that you should be able to quit, or you should be able to stop that. And that willpower is, you almost immediately realize that you don't have any power over this thing. And I mean, I think, like, for you, what was the big thing that, like, man, I don't have any power over this thing, that I can't just do it with some, you know, grit and pull my, you know, self up by my bootstraps? What made you realize that you couldn't do this thing?
I had tried to stop on my own willpower multiple times. You know, I'd say, that's it, I'm done forever. And I'd mean it. You know, I'm absolutely finished. And as life was coming at me, I didn't know how to, like you said before, I didn't know how to live life sober. I had masked everything for a long time. And just as I was going through that, you know, and trying it, and trial and error, trial and failure, that, I realized, man, that I couldn't do it on my own. I had to have some help. And it was difficult to even ask for help. You know, as men, it's difficult to ask somebody to help you and to admit that you're defeated, you know, that you can't do it.
That's a key, like, there in, you know, it's like asking for help. A lot of times, I think, first of all, we don't know how to get help. I think we don't know who to ask for help. And there seems to be all these different ideas. Like I always say, if you go to, like, the library, or you go to a bookstore, you're going to see thousands of books on self-help. And I mean, you take drinking alone, and I've actually done this. You look at books like on Amazon or something, and you look at how many books are out there about quit drinking. And I tried those things. I tried to, like, I'm going to read, and two of them, I talk about a lot. There was two of the books that were very popular, sold millions of copies. And yeah, I read both of those books at least twice, and it did not stick. It did not help me. It did not help me get through it. And I think about that. It's like, I think about a guy out there who's struggling, and he may even take I hated the word alcoholic. You know, I hated that word, because I'm like, it just seems like, you know, the picture you paint of, like, or what you see on TV is like some guy that's under the bridge in Oklahoma City who's holding up that sign that says, I'll work for food or whatever. And we think about those, or that they're just constantly drunk, or, you know, we put a label on what that looks like. And I think that's why, like, I was so scared to say that, or, you know, it's like, man, I don't feel, even though I would say something like, I have a drinking problem, or I drink too much. I would use those quite frequently. But yet I was afraid to put that label of, say, I am an alcoholic, because of the stigma that's involved with that, you know. And I think, like, if there's a good and bad, because, you know, medically it is considered a disease now, but when it wasn't before. And so it in some ways, like, once I cross over that, getting over being scared, or I don't know, maybe ashamed or something, then when I crossed over into this place of, like, okay, that's what I am, that also put a little relief on me, you know, because
Absolutely.
I'm like, man, at least I know what it is. It's kind of like I got cancer. Well, at least I know what's been wrong with me for, you know, however time that I haven't been feeling good, you know.
You can't work on a problem unless you know what the problem is.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
Exactly right.
And I think about, like, these guys that want to get help, but yet they're afraid of that. Like, for me, like, I went to treatment, and it took a pretty significant event for me to go to treatment. But I think about before that, where I felt like I needed help, and I'm like, I used excuses like, man, I got to work. I can't, take time off to go, to go get help. And I think about those excuses, and it's like I was kind of thrown in a situation where I had to make some decisions. And I listened to your story, like where you had to make some decisions because it opened up. But you could have got another job and went right straight back to work.
I could have, but I don't think I'd be sitting here today had I done so because the profession I chose, I work in the oil field. Yeah. Alcohol and other things are so readily accepted there. It's a culture. It's a way of life, like it is in many places. And for me, getting out of that culture for a period of time really made a lot of difference. Getting away from it and being able to seek out some help.
Yeah.
It really made a difference.
So you ended up going to Red Rock. So if that was kind of part of you and your wife's plan that, hey, I'm going to go do this, what made you turn to that versus like calling a rehab center and going to a different type of place? I mean, what made you choose that avenue?
Kind of outpatient, and I'm not 100% positive. Maybe it was.
Outpatient, whereas you went every day, and then
I did.
You went home at night. And,
I did,
and I could see how if that would appeal to somebody, especially married or family, and all that. And so that probably was one of the biggest appeals to it.
It was, and I didn't have a job, so I didn't have a whole lot of money going to be coming in. Now, while we had a little bit of money, without me having a job, not knowing when I was going to get another job, Red Rock was able to work with me where I didn't have to pay anything. Yeah. They state funded my treatment through them, and that was very appealing at the time.
And I'm actually, to be honest with you, Gene, I'm a little surprised by your story about Red Rock, not because I don't know that much about it, but I hear a lot of negative, but I wonder if that's kind of the negative, because you think about state, a state kind of facility, state funded, but also you hear about like you almost think, well, let me tell you my impression that I had thought about before was I knew people that had attempted suicide and they put them in Red Rock and then they were scared. But then it ended up turning out okay because they really got the help they needed. But I'm pretty surprised that you had a really good, experience there, I guess.
They helped me a lot. Red Rock, with my substance abuse, they helped some. But learning how to deal with emotions and things that I didn't understand, we did family counseling with me and my wife. Yeah. That made a huge difference. Absolutely made a huge difference. And I think a lot of it is what you put into it. You get out of what you put into things. You know what I mean?
It sounded like that was the case for me because when I went into treatment, man, I attended every single thing I could attend. And
absolutely.
Something had clicked in me and I don't know, it hadn't clicked in me before, but something had really clicked in me that I cannot continue living this way. I don't want to continue living this way. And I hear that kind of in your thoughts too. Going back to the willpower thing, and I actually had this thought yesterday. I was hearing some guys talk and I was just thinking, there seems to be such a fine line between, because, you talk about a lot of times we talk about recovery that yes, it's turning your will over to God, but then it's also action. And I think people get so confused by that, like this idea that I'm turning my will over to a higher power or turning my will over to God as you see them. And yet there is action and they get that action confused with like, okay, I'm doing it. It's willpower. I've got it on my own. But yeah, you hear a lot of stories about guys who went in with really their willpower and that kept them sober for a while, but then they end up turning back. And the same thing with me talking about the books, that I read these books and later I found out why those books were not effective for me was they did not have a spiritual side to them at all.
I agree with that 100%. With just the psychological side, I don't think this thing would have worked for me. It's the spiritual that saved my life. I really believe that. And on the willpower, I heard a guy one time say that eating a box of laxative and trying to use your willpower not to go to the bathroom is kind of the same on trying to use your willpower against alcoholism. Wow. The big book says that the will of us is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. And I'm not sure why, but that's exactly right. Yeah. It's amazing. It's not that we don't have willpower. It's just that it's strangely weakened when it comes to combating liquor. That obsession of the mind wins out every time over willpower.
Yeah. If you don't mind, and I think explaining, you have really two sides of this. You have the side of that there is something physically going on. And then you have another side, which is kind of like, it's the mental side. In the big book, it talks about like there is this physical, you have like they call it a doctor's opinion. Yeah. If you don't mind, explain to you what you like the differences between the two and how those two things, sometimes the spiritual side matches up with people. And then sometimes that I guess the physical side matches up with people too.
Right. As I understand it, what I've learned since I've been here is that alcoholism is an illness, threefold. It's mental, physical, and spiritual. Yeah. And the physical side they call an allergy, which at first really confused me because when I think about an allergy, I think of some manifestation, some itches, hives, throat swelling up, something of that nature. But I guess in the Webster's Dictionary, there is a definition of an allergy as an abnormal reaction. And if that's true, then the question begs to be asked, what's a normal reaction, right?
Right.
I guess 9 out of 10 people, when they drink alcohol, they get a slightly tipsy, out of control feeling followed by the desire to vomit.
Yeah.
That is not at all how I feel when I ingest alcohol.
Right.
When I drink alcohol, I get a very powerful, strong, in-control feeling and want to get up and go somewhere and do something. And, the allergy would all be academic and pointless if it wasn't for this obsession of my mind. Because until I take that first drink, the allergy isn't set in motion. The allergy doesn't take over. It's the obsession. It's when I'm not drinking, I'm thinking about drinking. Right. And for me, what that looked like is I got drunk the night before, caused havoc with my wife. 9:30 the next day, I'm feeling bad. I got a hangover. I'm standing in front of her and I tell her, sweetheart, I am done drinking forever. And by golly, I'm in it. Yeah. I'm done. That's it. And by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock noon, life's coming at me, all these emotions. And I'm thinking about all the things I did the night before. And then I have all the guilt, remorse, and shame. And next thing you know, I'm looking at what that drink's going to do for me rather than what it's going to do to me. And I can't not take it. And, I've started fights with my wife just so I could go out and get drunk, just things that didn't even matter. She'd make me a wonderful dinner and I'd tell her, this is crap. What are you thinking? This is disgusting. And just be a butt and get up. But it was just because I needed that alcohol. I needed to go drink. That obsession was winning. And I'd get up and go drink and things would go terribly again. And the next morning I would try to tell her again, once more, honey, I'm done, and this thing went on for years. Me and my wife have been together going on 18 years. And for 12 of that, I drank. Yeah. And, I guess it'd be a little longer than 18, going on 19 years. And for 12 of those, I was drinking and it was just terrible. I put her through absolute hell. There were times I lied a lot. It kind of goes hand in hand with what I did to be able to drink. To be able to drink the way I wanted to drink, I had to lie a lot. Yeah. And I would lie to her and I would tell her things were going good because I worked away from home for 2 weeks at a time. She could, I could say whatever I wanted, hang up the phone and go get drunk. And I did that for years. And then all that guilt of all those lies would well up in me after, say, 2-3 years. And all of a sudden, one day we'd be in an argument and I would just come clean about everything I'd been doing, and she would be devastated, rightfully so. And we'd reconcile as best we could and then we'd move forward. And I would do the same thing again. I would go into it and at first I would have a high resolve, I'm not going to drink. And I would hold true to that for a little bit. But the alcoholic I was and the type of guy I was, it wouldn't last for long. I couldn't deal with life sober. So I'd go a period of time and I wouldn't drink month, 2 months, and then it'd start over. Well, I can just have a beer. And never in my life have I drank a beer. So right there, that's a lie. What's the point of a beer? For a guy like me, there's no point in it. Right. I don't necessarily like the flavor of it. Yeah. I drink for effect. And I'd start drinking a beer. And for a little while, I could go with that, 1 or 2. But eventually it got worse. 1 or 2 would turn into 5 or 6. 5 or 6 would turn into 8 or 10. And it just progressed. And it went and we'd go a couple more years lying to her. She'd think everything was good. And then too much guilt, remorse. And I'd have to come clean. And I would. So, this time when I got sober, there was a lot of skepticism from her. And understandably so. She had been here before. She had thought that I was doing good and that we were doing good. Just to find out in a couple of years that nothing had ever really changed. So it's been a process. It really has.
It sounds like it. I go back to kind of like the word alcoholic, and I think that people would listen to this. They might say, "Am I alcoholic?" And I think that's a question they kind of ask themselves. Like I remember many times thinking, waking up the next day saying, thinking about all the stuff I'd done. And thinking, man, I'm never drinking again. And one thing that was a really impactful thing to me is that I read where other people had that same feeling that they were saying, "I'll never drink again." And they added one little line to it, which said, "And I meant it."
Yeah.
And I meant it 100%. And that actually really, I could relate to that, because I'm like, I meant it. I wasn't lying.
Yep.
But it just couldn't do it, and I think when people are listening to, this, they think that, again, I've got maybe 20 different problems or 20 different things going on in my life. And they feel like that drinking may be just one of them, and so I had a tendency to want to focus on all 19 others and think I'm going to work on those, and just thinking this is a portion of my life that's a problem too. And almost if I tackle those 19 others, then maybe the drinking I'll quit drinking. But really what I realized is that I was masking back to those problems. I was masking my problems by drinking. And I had to quit drinking in order to realize any solution to any of them, because basically, alcohol is a substance that controls your mind. It changes your mind. Your mind is not there exactly. A healthy mind, you can't think through those things. You can't figure out solutions. And for me, it's like, even though I had all these other things going on and I thought alcohol was just a symptom, it very well could have been. But I had to quit drinking in order to even see a way through any of it, because it's probably the most amazing part to me is that you quit drinking and then you see avenues to all those other issues. And it's really all related, all interrelated, and almost like a spider web. But the center on it is really, I've got to get my mind right. I got to have a sober mind to even look at this and to think about the solution. And, what's your thoughts on that? Is that kind of the conclusion, or you think differently, or what you think?
I'm with you 100%. I don't know about you, but I don't know. I was almost amazed at how many of my problems, or things I thought were problems, went away.
Yeah.
When the alcohol went away, it was just absolutely amazing. And I didn't really, and a lot of my problems, I was confused. I thought they were problems, but they weren't really problems. They were consequences of my drinking. My wife on my rear end, my boss on my rear end. They weren't problems. They were consequences of my behavior and how I'd been acting and the things I'd been doing. So
I think you bring up a great point. It comes down to, like, somewhere deep inside, you're not acting the way you think you should act, want to act, the person you want to be. Like, for me, a lot of times I wanted to say, man, this is just who I am. I'm just acting the way I am. I can't change it. This is who I'll always be. I'll always be this person. This is who Burl is. But then a part of me, it's like, man, that just realizing that that's not who I wanted to be in there. I was in constant conflict really with myself, because I was acting in a way that I didn't want to act.
Yeah.
I was treating people in a way that I didn't want to treat them. And I was hurting people too in ways that I didn't want to hurt them. And partly is kind of almost like an excuse to say, man, this is the way I am. Yeah. And I believed it. I believed that really I couldn't change. This is the way I was. I even, lots of positive things off drinking. It gave me more confidence. I always bring up dancing, like, man, I could dance and do whatever when I was drinking. And so, I was kind of afraid to let it go, afraid who would I be if I quit drinking? And by that one statement alone, it's kind of sad, because it's like, it makes me realize that drinking's not who I am. I don't think drinking's for anybody who they are. You know what I mean? And I think somebody who's not an alcoholic, it doesn't become who they are. Like you talked about, it's like wondering whenever, really kind of programming your life or running your life away around liquor and beer, like wondering where I'm, hey, do I have time to get to the store? Do I have, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And normal people don't do that. Normal people don't plan their life around the next drink. Mm-hmm. And me as being an alcoholic, I did. We couldn't go fishing without a drink. I couldn't light the barbecue grill without a beer. There were so many things that I couldn't do without alcohol being involved. And if there wasn't alcohol involved, I was such a crybaby or a pain in the butt that wasn't even funny. I made it terrible for everybody else.
Killjoy.
A killjoy. There you go. I was such a killjoy that I made it terrible for everybody else to be around me. Yeah. So I definitely agree with that 100%.
Man, I think that the road, for me has been, it's been difficult to learn to deal with things without drinking. It's been difficult. I've been very surprised by how many other, part of it called character defects, or how many other things have come up once I realized that, and I could really see, once I quit drinking and sobered up, that I realized, man, I am struggling in this area and I've masked it for so long. And then, but part of it is kind of back to what we're saying. It's like, man, okay, now I see it. I need to deal with it. And I don't want to just mask it, even though at times I'm tempted to. But I think just dealing with life, they call it dealing with life on life's terms.
Absolutely.
And I really wasn't dealing with life on life's terms.
I wasn't either for a lot of years. Absolutely. I didn't know how to. I had no skills and no tools for dealing with life sober. I had one trick in the box. That was it. And that was to drink. Yeah. It solved all my problems, I thought, for a lot of years. I started drinking at a very, very early age. So that's all I ever knew. That was the only solution I had programmed on my hard drive was to drink, and when bad things were happening, or good things were happening, it didn't matter. It was always go to drink, always.
Yeah. We've kind of skirted around it. We talked about it, but if somebody was to come up to you and say, Gene, am I an alcoholic? What would you say to them?
Same thing my sponsor told me. He said that alcoholism is the only disease that is self-diagnosed. The big book has many options for finding out whether or not you're alcoholic. It says step over to the nearest bar room, try some controlled drinking, try it more than once, try to start drinking and stop abruptly and see how well that works for you, and it give you an idea. There's 2 questions in the beginning of chapter 4 that help us decide whether or not we're alcoholic for ourselves. And I'd like to read those if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
It says, if, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. And they give you just that little bit of wiggle room. Looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck. It's probably a duck, So that's kind of.
So what if that same person, after you told them that, they say, Gene, I think I might be an alcoholic. What do I do now? What would you tell that person? I
would invite them to come to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that if you've never been to an AA meeting, you might, what would they expect? I mean, let's start from, I've never been to something like this. And of course it's intimidating. I give the story that the first time I went here in town, I went to the hotel first because that's where my GPS told me to go.
It's got the same address.
Talked to the guy who was behind the counter, and he pointed over there to the other building. And I think that by the way, that takes some, you gotta make some decisions there. You gotta try, you gotta work, you gotta be a little embarrassed, all that. So how would you describe that and what it would be like for somebody in general terms, like for somebody if they're really wanting to get help?
My first AA meeting was great. The people were kind, they were nice. They had what was called the newcomers meeting. And what everybody did was they went around the room and just kind of shared a little bit of their experience, strength, and hope with me, Yeah. And seeing all those people in that room, they were smiling, they were laughing, they seemed happy. And I had none of that at that time. And it was something I really wanted,
Yeah.
It looked very well appealing to me.
I think some of the best parts, one, is that you don't have to talk if you don't want to.
That's right.
You don't have to read because a lot of times we'll read. You don't have to read if you don't want to. You absolutely, and this was a big discussion for you and I even got on here, is that absolutely you remain anonymous, meaning that, nobody's going to be, it's I found it to be one of the safe places for me.
Me too.
Because through my upbringing and the denomination or the church that I went to, I did not find that church was a safe place for me. And I found that I was afraid that if I told my problems to maybe somebody at church and again, this is my experience, not everybody has this experience, but that I was afraid that, they would talk about it later to other people, that I didn't have confidence or confidentiality and those kind of things. And, I worried about things like that. I talked to a pastor recently, Gene, who we talked about the idea of like, why don't people go to their pastor for like, counseling or help? And I mean, I think he had a great answer, and he's like, man, I see that because they don't want to see me every Sunday after that point, when they poured out their heart to me. And like his solution was, we talked about what was his solution. His solution was, man, I'll send them to counseling, to people that I recommend. That way they don't have to go through that. In this case, you have complete confidentiality that these guys know. It's so hard written code in this process or in this meeting in AA that you are anonymous, that people are not going to be talking about it when they leave that room, that you're protected. You can absolutely say anything you want to say, and they're going to not judge you. They're going to, and I think that those parts, people, like, even if you just thought, man, maybe I am a alcoholic, I'm not sure, and I go attend a meeting, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, people just come in and they're just going to sit there and listen sometimes.
And that's perfectly all right. Absolutely. What helped me to stay was how easy they made it for me to leave. You know what I mean? Nobody expected anything out of me. I didn't have to participate if I didn't want to. Yeah. And it was very easy to get in there, and it was a very comfortable environment. The anonymity was huge. We introduced ourselves by our first names. There's still a lot of people I attend meetings with. I don't know their last names. Yeah. I don't know. And I think that's pretty neat. And I do feel comfortable there. Absolutely. I can share anything. And I think a lot of that is why a lot of people don't go to their pastors and things too, because we hold those people to such a high standard that maybe they're not going to understand what I'm going through, because I hold that person to such a higher standard. When I go into a meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous, it's with a lot of like-minded people who have a lot of the same experiences that I have gone through. And that's nice to be able to share and relate and feel a part of something who've shared in the same trials and the same tribulations,
Yeah, being able to relate is such a huge deal. I mean, I remember you telling a story about like, it was easy when you were like doing treatment or whatever, that to somebody, and I had the same experience where, I have like a 20-year-old who went to school and got her degrees and all that. And she has her diploma on the wall.
Yep.
But she can't relate to what you're talking about because she just hasn't had those life experiences. And part of that's, you're assuming, but you just feel like, man, book knowledge is there. I struggle with that a lot. In a lot of different areas. It's like, man, your book knowledge is there, but I don't know if you've ever experienced it. Like I deal with that with like, when I think about business, it's like, here's how to start your own business, but yet have you ever done it? Right. And yet, when you walk into the rooms of AA, you absolutely know these guys have dealt with it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excuse me. Exactly. Like when I went to Red Rock, there was most of the counselors in there were not alcoholic or drug addict. They had their plaques on the wall. Therefore, when they said something that I didn't agree with, it was very easy for me to say, yeah, right. How do you know? And I couldn't do that in AA because you're not giving me book knowledge. All you're doing is sharing your experience with me, and I can't argue with your experience. Your experience is your experience, I can't say you don't know because you do.
Absolutely. I've been talking about a concept that really I learned from AA, but it's been very eye-opening to me. And for me, it's been instrumental in understanding kind of the way I learn and the way that I relate to people. It's like hearing their stories versus someone preaching or teaching at you.
Right.
That is a big deal for me right now. When I hear your story, or I hear another guy's story and I hear what they went through. Yeah, I didn't go through exactly what they went through exactly, but man, they can relate to the struggles I'm having. And I think that people's story becomes very relatable. And I also talk about it in the way that, man, I can't refute your story. If you tell me this is what happened, man, that's what happened.
Exactly.
And that's what I love about those meetings is the fact that you can tell your story and really nobody can refute it. You might have a knucklehead every once in a while say, well, you should be thinking this way. But the truth is that the judgment is still not there. You know what I mean? The judgment is not, I'm judging you for what your experience or your story.
Right.
That's missing, from the equation.
And I'm rebellious. I have been my whole life. So if I was to go somewhere where somebody would tell me what I ought to do and what I ought to think, right there, my ears shut off, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not what I get in AA. People just sharing their experience. They tell me what has happened to them, and I relate it to my own stuff.
Help me understand, and maybe people listening understand, because like if you were really not been around AA, all you've done is heard maybe what you see on TV or maybe somebody else talk about. One of the things that like Christians, I've heard a negative comment about being like a power greater than yourself. And like people struggling with that. It's like, what does that mean? Or is it God? Is it Jesus? Who is it? And I think it's really like at first I didn't understand that either. And then when I get into there, I start to understand differently. How would you describe that part of really, a God of your understanding and what that means?
Okay. When I first got here, my sponsor told me that I had to find a power greater than myself. And, he made the description. He told me, he said, go out in the parking lot and there was a tree out there. He said, try to pull that tree up. He said, if you can't pull that tree up, then I think what they were trying to relate to me is that they don't care what I believe in. I just have to believe in something besides myself, Yeah. And for me, that was key, that it didn't matter to them. There's no God that I didn't have to believe in the Baptist God or the Catholic God. It was just something greater than myself. And for me, that made all the difference in the world. Then they give me time to form a relationship with that God. And for me, it was slow. It was kind of over just trying it and seeing how it goes. I remember one story in particular. I hadn't been sober, I say about 10 months. It was around my birthday. My birthday's in October. And I got sober in January. It was 2018. I went over to my in-laws' house for a birthday party or birthday get-together. And my father-in-law gave me a $100 bill and a card. And I took that $100 bill out of the card and I stuck it in my pants pocket. I was wearing sweatpants. And then me and the wife had dinner. We went home, went for a walk around the neighborhood like we always do. And the next day, when we got back from our walk, take a shower, I took my clothes off, put them in the dirty clothes. And the next day I go looking for this $100 bill. I go find my sweatpants in the dirty clothes, stick my hand in the pocket, no $100 bill. Yeah. I'm thinking I had to have lost it on our walk. So here I go, man, I hit the neighborhood and I'm scouring the neighborhood. I get my wife and mother-in-law involved and we're all scouring the neighborhood for this $100 bill that I lost. Didn't find it, but something amazing happened to me. On that last trip around the neighborhood, I stopped and I said a little prayer. I said, God, I just pray that if I don't find that $100, that somebody finds it who can use it. Yeah. And I go home and I try to stop thinking about it, take a shower. That same evening, we were set to go over to the in-laws' house to have dinner. And my wife and mother-in-law had already left, and I was still looking for the $100 bill, obviously. Yeah. So they had left before I did. And when I pulled in my father-in-law's driveway, I pulled off the driveway like I normally do in the grass. I opened my truck door, and guess what was laying at my feet? $100 bill. Right there it was. And, it's just little stuff like that to me isn't coincidence anymore. It wasn't luck. The wind had been blowing. Oklahoma wind. Right. There's no way that $100 bill should have sat right there on top of the grass for 2 days, day and a half. For sure. But it was still right there. And I thought that was amazing. Good
story. Part of that, I love that you said it. People could miss it. Like one thing you said is that it took you time to find out who that God was.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think that partly some people's fear may be that, AA or anybody is going to stuff down this idea or this religion down your throat. And it's like, man, that's the whole point of it. It's like you're given time to determine who God is in your life.
Absolutely.
And, even the story with the $100 bill, it's like, that was little ways that God was showing you, who he was. And you can say, take the same story, man, I never did find it. Yep. But the point is that in your life at that moment, he was speaking to you, you know what I mean, in his way, and you were discovering who he was. That's one thing that I've, really, come to the conclusion, like it's been the same for me, the same kind of journey. It's like, yes, I grew up in Christian home and I went to church and all these things. And yes, I was, believed that I was a Christian. But for me, I had to relearn who God was for me. Absolutely. Because I had this one idea, I mentioned this not too long ago. I was like, if somebody asked me if God could help you stop drinking, if you asked me, Gene, if you said, Burl, do you think God can help me stop drinking? I'd be like, absolutely, he can help you. But I didn't believe that for myself. You see what I'm saying? It's absolutely. Like, I believed he could do it for you. but I didn't believe he could do it for me. And to realize, man, I believe in this God so much, but yet I don't even believe he can help me stop drinking or help me better my life or change my behaviors or help me become the man that I, want to be. I didn't believe it for myself.
For me, I didn't feel like I deserved his help.
Yeah,
I had turned to him time and time again, and then I had turned around and done the very thing I told him I wouldn't do again. So I didn't feel like I deserved God's help, So that's kind of what it was for me.
think it's funny because I think that's an ongoing theme with a lot of guys is that they have lost that kind of self-value and self-worth. And, I love it. Like when you talk about, I think it's Joe and Charlie, which are great. If you guys haven't listened to them, they're great. Joe and Charlie, look that up. AA, Joe and Charlie.
Big Book Study.
You can find a Big Book Study. I love listening to them, but I think one of them talk about it's like, man, they had no confidence, no whatever. In other words, they didn't feel like they were anything and low self-esteem. And then one day they start drinking. They felt like they're big.
They had arrived.
They have arrived, and I can relate to that because, I had very low self-esteem as a child, very, through different abuse and things that had happened, trauma and things that had happened in my life. Well, then all of a sudden, like, man, I was scared of women. I was scared of girls, and yet I have this confidence boost from drinking, but oh, how it went awry. They talk about like at the beginning, it gives you what you need or you feel like you need, but man, that quickly through time goes awry. And for some people, that may be 6 months that it goes awry. So some people, it may take 20 years to go awry, but either way, at some point it goes awry. And when it does, it's like, now you're having to find your confidence in something else.
Yep.
Now you're having to learn who you are again in something else. And I can relate to that because I didn't know who I was then when I started drinking at a young age. And now at 50 years old, I'm realizing that I got to figure out who I am. I got to figure out who God is in my life. And that's why for me, it perfectly worked to see a God of my understanding because I had to relearn who God was in so many ways and who he was for me, because like I said, if I believe absolutely he could help Gene, but I just didn't believe he could help me.
I understand that.
And that's way different, because it's personal, and that's why a God of your understanding really comes to be another way to say it would be a personal God.
God personal to us. Indeed.
To us. And so, and I think it also cuts out all the religious stuff, which is, you better believe this way. And I don't know how you'd agree with it, but it's like I was taught my whole life that the road was narrow to God. The road was very narrow,
hard to get to.
Yes. And, and I know where they get it in the Bible. I know the verse, but part of it is like through this, my experience now is that, man, no, I think the road is broad. It's a lot broader.
You bet.
And in that road, I believe that he was inviting us all in, and I think we just look at it differently. I think that we start with these preconceived notions about who God is through our experience, through our families, through however we have. I mean, that you can imagine if somebody had been abused in church, then man, they have a pretty poor outlook of God. And, you've heard this. They say that if how you relate to God is how you relate to your father. So if your father was, real hard nosed and, disciplinarian, then you're going to relate to God like that. Well, we look at imperfect people to tell us who God is. And I think through this journey, he starts to reveal who he is. And that makes a big difference it's made a big difference in my life to realize that.
Mine too. And it's all been through the seeking. I never really sought God in my life before. When I was younger, I went to church, but I didn't really go with the intention of trying to find God of my understanding. I was young, And my parents never made us go to church. They never forced us to do that. So a lot of times I didn't. When I went to church, I went with friends and just kind of to hang out a little bit. It wasn't going to try to learn about God. And in the meantime, since I've grown, I've never sought God. And I've never really had any kind of understanding of a God. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, like I said, I believe that there was something, but I'm like you. I didn't believe that it would work in my life. Maybe it's working miracles in yours, and that's great. But I didn't believe that it would do the same for me. But through just a little bit of willingness and trying to give my life to God and to live differently, it's opened the door, and it's just grown from that point, you know?
Man, I think you bring up like a great word, and the great word is like seeking, you know, and you have to be to this point in your life where you're seeking something, you know, and for me, it's like it took some pretty major events for me to start seeking.
Yes, it did.
You know, I think like half-ass efforts maybe in the past to seek, you know, and using excuses like, well, I tried and that didn't work. And, you know, I can't change
accepting failure,
everything we, you know, talked about. But the whole seeking, it's like, man, how can you go to this hotel and then, you know, go to the wrong place, talk to the wrong person, and he point you in the right direction? Part of that is you have to be seeking. You have to be willing to go. That's a little roadblock, but you can imagine it's like, yeah, when you're really seeking, sometimes there's some major roadblocks, but you have to want it.
Persevere.
You have to persevere through it. And, you know, I think there's two ways to persevere for you to get to that point. One is the school of hard knocks, you know what I mean? Which is me.
The school we're familiar with.
Yeah. I mean, it's me. I had to go the hard way.
Me too.
I mean, the absolute hard way. And some people don't have to go the hard way, you know, and part of that is like, it don't matter how you go, but understand it's the seeking part. It really is. And wanting something different. You know, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. You've heard of that, but it's like, man, it's so true. Like at that point in my life, like I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, you know, we each have our own individual stories, but we're the commonality of like what we're talking about with an AA group is that we can come together and we're all trying to seek God. We're also trying to understand what's going on in our life, you know, and how to get better and how to be the person we want to be. So good stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Man, I feel like because, you know, we have listeners from all over, not just here in Elk City, but from all over, mainly all over, not necessarily here. I want to make sure that if they want to try to figure out something they can do, you know, one of the things, like I have an app on my phone. What's that called? Meeting Finder. Absolutely. You can download that app and it'll show you your area, what AA meetings are going on and what times are going on. I mean, we live in a pretty small area, and so that app works for us. You can also, I know, Google, you know, AA.org, and you can find some information there. I think if you just want to like listen, if you're more of the listening kind of guy, then I think that the Joe and Charlie is great. And it kind of starts at the beginning with like, hey, I'm an alcoholic, you know, really thinking about through those things. And then also there's more resources, of course, on there. There's books on there and there's things that resource and any of those avenues, I think you could start and try to figure out. But I don't want to discount a very important part of it, which is you have to find kind of that fellowship in part of it is leading you to the fellowship. But if you just sit at home and read a book or listen to an audio, I think you're missing a big part of what it's all about.
Meetings are necessary.
Yeah. And it is. It's like, I'm sure somebody's going to, you know, get upset about this, but for me at this moment, it's my church.
Absolutely.
You know, for me, and meaning that I at the beginning of this thing, like first 90 days, I was attending a meeting almost every single day, and I chose to. I didn't have to go. I chose to, and that was part of me seeking information. You know, nowadays that I'm at like 6 months of not drinking, I attend 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. But that's my choice. And, you know, you can think, and for me, it's my church, it's my way to connect. It's the fellowship. It's really when I'm having a bad day, I make sure I go that way. You know, and so I don't want people to meet the fellowship or miss the fellowship, because just like me, I sit there and can read some books over it. But if I don't get to the fellowship part of it and seeing that camaraderie and that really relatability, then I could miss the whole thing.
It's a different perspective going to meetings. It really is. I've learned so much from other people, you know, and listening to their experience, strength, and hope, and their take on the literature, you know, and help. The book was written a long time ago. Yeah. Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous.
That's probably the most amazing thing. This book was in like 1935. 1939.
Absolutely.
And it's very relatable.
Unchanged since 1939.
Very relatable. You know.
Absolutely. But it was written a long time ago. So there's a lot of language in there that was difficult for me to understand. Those two guys, Joe and Charlie, you talk about, those guys really changed my perspective.
We're talking about two country boys from Oklahoma. Aren't they both from Oklahoma?
Yeah. One's from Tulsa. I believe Joe's from Tulsa. And Charlie's from around that area.
They passed away now, but but great. And you can tell that it's a very popular series because it's not very hard to find.
It's not very hard to find.
And multiple ways to find it. So,
you bet.
And I think those are good ways to listen. Gene, is there anything that I missed that you'd like to talk about? I want to make sure I hit on anything you want to talk about.
I want to thank you for inviting me to do this. It gets me out of my comfort zone. I was told when I first got to Alcoholics Anonymous that if I was in my comfort zone, I was probably doing it wrong. Yeah. So I appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on. I cannot tell you how much I personally am appreciative of you being willing to help, take me under your wing, give me advice, and just mainly be a listening ear. And for sure, I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and do something that is different. And so thanks a lot, brother.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to Positively Undefeated. If there was something in this show that resonated with you, please share the show with your community. Want this show delivered each Monday morning to your podcast app of choice, please subscribe or follow. And if you'd like to get a hold of Burl, please do so by going to burlstricker.com/contact.